British lawyers call on the government to press for ceasefire in Gaza. This is more than 250 British lawyers, including eminent KCs and professors of law, have called on the UK government to press for a ceasefire in Gaza, saying serious breaches of international law are being committed. And I should add here that Lord Neuberger, former president of the Supreme Court, was one of 8 eminent Jewish lawyers who also warned that Israel that it must abide by international law obligations in its operations in Gaza. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the legalities. And a lot of people are saying, are we talking about the ceasefire? What exactly are we talking about that lawyers are, including Jewish lawyers, are saying to Israel, hang on here?
Yes, good evening, Trisha. Good evening to everyone listening at home or on the move. International law, and this first letter from I guess about 11 days ago from I think 7 British Jewish lawyers of various levels of seniority. You're right, including Lord Neuberger, former president of the Supreme Court, also including Adam Wagner, a junior barrister who is really already a great in human rights. I say that I was a co-pupil of his at Manchester Grammar, same generation. Now, the main points that it makes in that letter, in advance of the atrocities, eerily, as if they were foreseen, that, and it's so important to be careful about language. Well, atrocities, violations, whatever you're going to call them, international law in this letter forbids the siege of civilian populations and reminds the Israeli government that there are 1 million children, and it would be a grave violation of an international law to hold them under siege. And of course, according to many people, that's exactly what's happening.
The cutting off, when we say under siege, that's the cutting off of supplies, water,
it means
electricity.
Absolutely. And it talks, it's not just the physical siege, but it's also that combatants take care to ensure the minimum destruction of civilian life and infrastructure. And the second, more recent letter that has been doing the rounds in the last 24 hours now, I think, stands at 335 signatories. Sir Geoffrey Bindman, KC, a Knight of the Realm and an Honorary King's Counsel, perhaps the father of modern human rights law, certainly in the solicitor's profession, and Mike Mansfield, KC. Well, he doesn't need much introduction. No. Stephen Lawrence, Dodi Fayed, the Birmingham 6, the Guildford 4. This letter summarizes those attacks by Hamas in detail and makes it plain that they are extreme violations, ongoing violations in international law. And before recounting the Israeli response, which so far conservatively stands at 6,500 dead, including almost 3,000 children. And these are UN figures, not Hamas figures that might be open to some suspicion. The central point in that letter is this, and I think it's one that most of us would probably agree with, that the commission of violations of international law doesn't justify more violations by another party. Now, humanitarian law does not. It emphasizes mean pacifism. It means you discriminate between civilians and soldiers proportionately when you can, as you try to meet military objectives. However, the UN Secretary General, the letter says, has observed we are witnessing clear violations of international humanitarian law. The starvation of a civilian population in this letter is regarded as is pointed out as a potential method of warfare. And isn't that a chilling thought, Trisha?
It is. I've just got to say that I find one for rolling our eyes is that the Russians have actually come out in condemnation of Israel for what they're doing. And I was like, blimey, that's a bit pot calling the kettle black.
Yeah, and the geopolitics are merry-go-round is whirring away at the moment, isn't it? Of course, because the more attention and controversy there is around this,
we won't look at what's happening in Ukraine.
absolutely at a critical time when weapons supplies one way or the other in this crucial period before the rains begin towards the end of November, as I understand it, could make the difference, or could make a significant difference in that conflict. The second, returning to the open letter, it's the comments from senior members of the Israeli government and military that are raised not only in the letter signed by a large number of very senior lawyers and academics that we're talking about now, but also the previous letter written by these moderate and brave British Jewish lawyers. These comments, for example, the Israeli Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, saying that they are releasing all restraints, and the plan is to quote, eliminate everything. That's language that we isn't it the type of language that's not just chilling, but we just don't want, and we think that we've progressed beyond in our society, with all the sympathy to the fact that of the
children, because
rage and panic of hostages, as well as the fact, but all in the context of the fact that action must be seen to be proportionate, and the indiscriminate killing of children, the indiscriminate destruction of homes without considering, as it appears to be occurring from what we're seeing from UN reports, methodically and geographically, rather than just heading through an area, rather than selecting targets. This is not a proportionate.
This is where this comes in. Let's talk about the law in the UK now. Lots of crowing about. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the meaning of jihad, and I know the Express, for one, saying people aren't being arrested for calling for jihad. Jihad, before we get into this, literally means striving or doing one's utmost. Within Islam, there are two basic theological understandings of the word. The greater jihad is the struggle within oneself to purify one's heart, do good, avoid evil. The lesser jihad is an outward struggle. Now, often jihad is, and we've talked about this when we've had our imam on the show, it's been hijacked and misused by terrorists. And so people outside Islam think jihad is about annihilating and about war and what have you. It only just sort of popped up during the Afghanistan war, but that is not the meaning of the word. It's been taken and misused, a bit like the word woke has been taken from black people and misused. It happens again and again. So what are the legalities? And it's how you use it. If people are talking in the streets about jihad against Israel and misusing the phrase in a warlike thing, and chanting for Hamas, that's one thing. But it's going to be difficult for the police, is it not, to ascertain exactly and grammatically how someone is using this word. I mean, far be it for me to say this, Joseph, but perhaps there's a political virtue signaling part of all of this.
There's a lot going on here, isn't there? First of all, the context seems to be that we've got a government that, just generally speaking, either because it's accepted it's lost the next election, or alternatively it just wants to stay in touch as much as it can with its core base, is striving to be as far to the right as it can legitimately, without losing popularity or losing the loyalty of its more moderate loyal supporters on the one hand. But you also have, I think, kind of a little bit depressingly, Keir Starmer, who at the same time doesn't want to be seen to be soft on anything, doesn't want to lose the centre, even if the centre's migrated in the last 20 years substantially to the right, and is kind of,
we discussed that in the headlines, but just coming back to that, is it illegal to shout to say the word
everything
jihad?
Depends on context. Words are important, context is important, but I would say this, Trisha, words and context are important for the police and politicians too. And let me explain what I mean by that. Carl Gordon, he's leading the Metropolitan Police's command team on this. is giving grandstanding press releases and comments saying we will intervene if anyone's heard calling for jihad against Israel. Okay, if someone's calling for jihad specifically against Israel, he goes on to say the officers will intervene. But then he actually rose back because legally he can't say much more than that because context is so important, and he can't make blanket promises, the like of which Suella Braverman might like him to make with regard to arrests taking place. We will then forward back to our counter-terrorism and no doubt lawyers that information in a live setting to see if we can then make arrests. In other words, he's accepting that there are limitations because free speech and context are so important at the moment. We've got the grandstanding reassurance about enforcement and all of that, but it's terribly wishy-washy about outcome because the law does not give you carte blanche to arrest people for words that you don't like unless you're specific. Jihad, even if it's jihad, holy war, against whom, what for, when, what kind. These are the important questions of certainty that courts require before convictions can take place. And you're right, talking about internal struggle or indeed external struggle is too nebulous and won't be enough. But I want to say this. There is this wider point. These protests aren't fringe protests. I was with my daughter and my brother and family today in Manchester on a tram to see a Halloween, not a Halloween protest, but a kind of Halloween inflatable parade. And there were lots of people, lots of normal middle class people, the great and the good, rich people, poor people, students, working people on their way to these protests today. It's clear that there is popular support. There's popular support, which is not shared by our government. And that's probably, there's a concern that the police and government are getting dangerously close to talking about security in a politicized way. And right now, that's not what's required. Right now, the message from governments should be a statesperson-like message. This peace, should be about peace. Absolutely.
Peace and lives lost rather than scoring points.